Welcome everyone to this next breakdown of sort of the offseason outlooks for teams across the NFL. Next, we're going to focus in on the AFC East. So, for the Patriots, first team up, we looking at some of the needs. We've got quarterback, wide receiver, slot receiver, linebacker, and then offensive and tight end depth. So with their first round pick, number 3, they took Drake Maye, quarterback out of North Carolina. Definitely someone with a lot of upside. In the second, they got Polk, a wide receiver out of Washington. In the third, they got Caden Wallace as a offensive tackle out of Penn State. And then for the first fourth round pick, they got Layden Robinson as a guard. And then the other fourth round pick, they got Javon Baker, another wide receiver. Then they had two sixth round picks. They got Dial as a cornerback out of South Carolina. Then their second sixth round pick, they took Joe Milton, quarterback out of Tennessee. Then their last pick, they got Bell, which is a tight end out of Florida State. So looking at them, they filled a lot of needs. Obviously, it's a lot easier to fill a lot of needs when you got a lot of needs, but they got a lot of depth pieces, and it'll give the Patriots a ton more flexibility with sort of re-signing players, going into next year, maybe re-signing some during the season this year. And so when you really look at the draft, it's all about Drake Maye, obviously. When the number 3 overall pick, if he reaches his ceiling, it's obviously the right choice. But if he maybe is just like middling and he's not really like a difference maker at the quarterback position, they could have easily had Marvin Harrison Jr. So in the end, that was probably the safer pick. They definitely need a wide receiver. Um, and they could have, maybe gotten either traded up or maybe gotten a different quarterback in the second round. So, if he really hits that ceiling, if he becomes a top 10 type quarterback, obviously, it's the best move because quarterback's the most important position. But if he doesn't, if he flops or he just doesn't really meet his potential, obviously that's like a major problem. So next we have, obviously Polk is going to be like part of the offense. Day one, I don't really see any reason why he wouldn't start on the Patriots. I don't really see a ton of difference makers. On the Patriots, I think Polk. That is, I think he's well rounded. I don't know if he's super polished at this point in terms of route running and stuff like that. I think there's definitely reasons why he was obviously not as talented um, as Odunze, for Washington. But when you see his game, but he'll if he plays, he'll learn, he'll develop, and he'll definitely get better. And I don't know if he'll ever become a number one target, but he'll definitely get a lot better. So we look at some of the offensive lines. So we've got Wallace was taken in the third round. He's sort of competition for Okorafor, as a rookie, and he provides good depth. He could win the job. There's no reason why he can't. But it definitely something to sort of look at, sort of for training camp battles, that sort of stuff. Their fourth round pick was a guard, Robinson, sort of depth as a rookie. I think that once David Andrews is either cuts or retires, then Strange can go back to center, which I think, if I remember right, is what he played in college. And then you can move Robinson to guard. I don't think Robinson has any experience with center, but if he shows some abilities, you could always just slide him right into center, keep Strange at guard. Javon Baker is an interesting. He's sort of very like a traitsy kind of wide receiver. Definitely more on the outside. I don't really see a ton of versatility with the two receivers that the Patriots got. So there's a little bit of that where it would have been nice if maybe they had gotten someone who could play outside, but maybe does a good job playing inside. We'll sort of see kind of how those two receivers develop. Dial is the cornerback is really better fit for a zone corner from what I've seen, and it could maybe mean that Gerard Mayo is switching to being less man coverage heavy. I think with sort of the how we've seen sort of scoring be down with the sort of cover two shells and all that sort of stuff against the really good quarterbacks. It could show maybe a little bit of a shift. I know that I think we've sort of seen some of this stuff in the past with kind of moving on from J.C. Jackson some other kind of pieces on the Patriots, maybe signaling a little bit of a shift in terms of whether being man heavy, zone heavy, and that kind of stuff. I think in order to be like a heavy man to man team, now you really need to have super talented corners. With Gonzalez coming back, obviously, I think he's probably a little bit more of a man corner, but I think probably what the Patriots will end up doing more, or could be doing more, I should say, is maybe like zone coverage with sort of man-to-man concepts rather than being a strict man-to-man team. So it'll be interesting to see kind of like what the preseason looks like. Do the Patriots come out like pretty predominantly man to man, or is it more of a maybe zone, or maybe like a mix combination of both? Maybe being less predictable, I think, will really help, especially Drake Mayo's first year. Trying to be a little less predictable on defense, I think. Under sort of the end of Bill Belichick, he was what he was, and when it worked, it was amazing. Sometimes holding teams to very little scoring in yards, and then when it didn't work, sometimes they were just getting completely blown out. So be very interesting to see. So with the last pick with Bell, he's a very versatile tight end. He needs to develop run blocking to be an every down player, like a lot of these sort of receiving targets that we see. He's probably going to be more of a depth tight end, maybe like a practice squad candidate, depending on sort of how things shake up, especially with wide receiver. I think a lot of that will sort of depend. But with the differences in the kickoff this year, I think I could see keeping more tight ends for that sort of being able to have a little more beef up front in terms of blocking and then kind of getting through, as opposed to the traditional kickoff where having more fast, you might want to have a few more fast players, like wide receivers, corners, safeties, that kind of stuff, doing special teams. So be interesting to sort of see what happens with that. He's definitely going to compete with Austin Hooper for tight end 2. I don't see any reason for him to be able to sort of take over and become like a tight end 1. But I do think that there is the opening for him to maybe develop his rookie year and maybe even transition into that if he shows some some flashes, because the offense will probably look a lot different. It might be a little more pass heavy of an offense, and maybe blocking for the tight ends won't be as valuable. So we'll sort of see kind of like how Henry is used. Maybe Bell might be kind of his backup, and then maybe Austin Hooper might be like the tight end 2, for like kind of like passing downs, or like bigger going jumbo and then throwing out of it, and that sort of stuff. So I definitely sort of see a lot of good here. I would kind of give them maybe like a B, because I feel like that there are some things that they kind of went a little more like offensive heavy. I was actually thinking that they might get a little more defensive line depth, which they didn't actually do at all. They didn't draft anyone either on the defensive line or in the linebacker position, which I thought they might do like later in the rounds. Joe Milton was kind of an odd pick to me. I kind of get it. Like having a cost control backup is always a good thing, but I do think that Drake Maye needs that veteran presence. So I don't know if they're planning on if Joe Milton's not going to just be sort of like a stash of the practice squad and see what happens, but for like a 6th round pick to just sort of stash on the practice squad, I feel like it's a little high. I think that's like more of like a 7th round kind of flyer, especially if you have like a bunch of sevenths. So I'm not really sure what that's going to kind of look like, but I definitely see I definitely see that like where there might be some needs for some other things, and again with the Patriots, they have a lot to do, they have a lot to build out, can't do it all in one year, so they probably just valued those players more than the others. So all right, so let's go ahead and transition over to the Jets. So the Jets also have a decent amount of needs. They need a slot wide receiver. They needed a guard, a tight end 2, a running back 2, depth on the for the defensive backs, for the offensive line, and then I see like D tackle depth as a big need, also. So the first overall pick, number 11, they got Fashanu, the offensive tackle out of Penn State. They didn't have a 2nd round, but in the 3rd round they got Malachi Corley as a wide receiver. Then the 4th they got Braylon Allen as a running back. Fifth round, Jordan Travis, a quarterback. Another fifth, Isaiah Davis, running back. And then they got Quantez Stiggers as a cornerback, actually out of the CFL. And then in the seventh, they got Jalen Key as a safety out of Alabama. So I really think for the first pick, it was definitely the best player available. I don't really see it as like a huge need on paper, but I think with all the injuries that they've had in the past, and obviously Aaron Rodgers kind of coming back, and they definitely don't want him taking a bunch of hits, especially early on, as he's kind of trying to kind of get back acclimated to you know to you know physicality of the NFL. It could signal a little bit of concern with Tyron Smith's health, or that's just maybe like a 1 year rental. Fashanu, might need to develop his technique before he can really play. So it may not be necessarily about this year. He may not start. He might be more of like first tackle off the bench, jumbo packages, that kind of stuff. Obviously, goal line. Um, so it'll be interesting to see. I mean, he could easily just sort of beat someone out and be the sort of day one starter and kind of go from there. But I do see like what kind of more of a traitsy, maybe not quite as polished technique wise. So maybe he won't start, but kind of when a number like an 11th overall pick, kind of really need those to be sort of day one starters. So they may see him to say, hey, here's the things we like. We're gonna maybe take a few lumps. Maybe game plan around it, give him a little extra help if he needs it against certain matchups and stuff. So it might mean that he's sort of the starter coming out the gate. It would be really interesting to see training camp and how all that sort of works. So Corley with the wide receiver, I really see him more as a slot receiver as opposed to someone on the outside. They which kind of makes sense. I think I don't know if drafting a boundary corner or I should say a slot or a boundary receiver. Sorry. Um, with Mike Williams coming in, and obviously with Garrett Wilson, I don't know how much playing time someone will get. So I think Corley is definitely like a big fit there. I don't think that's like a high priority for them, but I think leaning into sort of this is sort of make or break for the whole Aaron Rodgers sort of experience with like we at least like make a run for the playoffs, and load up on weapons, load up on offensive line. I can definitely see a lot of value there, and I think he is going to be a good receiver, especially grabbing him in the third round like that. They picked two running backs. So it's going to be a lot of competition for running back two. They also grabbed Jordan Travis for backup quarterback and maybe a future starter after Roger retires. A lot of these picks not necessarily aimed at this year, but sort of at the future. So it's sort of a little um, counter. So obviously a big sort of narrative is the Jets are basically Super Bowl or bust and all this sort of stuff, and I just don't think that teams think that way. That's more of a media sort of thing. So I think they did get some people who are probably going to have a role this year, but I think that they are sort of kind of planning for the future a little bit. With Bryce sort of going down that his rookie year, you never know. So it's always good to have good backups. Running backs who are kind of sort of hungry to really make a name for themselves. So I do sort of see some of the early, kind of the first 4 rounds, even 5 rounds. We had like a mix of sort of what's sort of there. So with Stiggers, with the cornerback, I think it's good depth. He's going to sort of need to obviously adjust to the American Football League as opposed to CFL. Much bigger field and penalties are called much different than in the NFL. It's good key depth. He's probably going to be more of a special teamer, but I do sort of see some potential of maybe developing in. Overall, I'd kind of give the Jets a B grade. I think they got a lot. They got a lot filled. They did a good job with a lot of that sort of stuff. Maybe a little too future focused with some of these players. I'm not sure if they can necessarily compete all that well without having some players that will be able to fit certain roles this year. I think they did get obviously that with Corley, first round pick with Fashanu. I think that's going to be interesting to sort of see how that all of that all that kind of goes. But it's a little weird to do that with like sort of the approach to, might have been better to get a really good guard, and then maybe, maybe it's possible they want to move Fashanu to guard, but I really don't think that's a good thing to do. I think we've seen it so many times in the NFL where I think some offensive linemen have really been hampered by the fact that they've been moved around a lot. I think you can do that maybe later in the year or later in someone's career when they really know kind of like the whole offensive line and they're a little more comfortable. They can kind of learn, but learning technique and then having to learn the scheme and the NFL, and it's just a lot to do. It's a big step up in terms of like the talent on the field. So it'll be interesting to sort of see what happens there. I personally think Fashano should just learn tackle, and they should just hope for the best when it comes to their inside offensive linemen. But wouldn't have been horrible to draft a guard, but definitely not at 11. I think that the value probably wasn't there, and I think the value that was there obviously was on the defensive side, and I think they feel pretty good about what they have. So it'll be I think training camp it'll be a lot easier to sort of see kind of where everything sort of lines up with all of that. One thing that the Jets could be looking at is maybe hoping that a veteran guard gets cut loose during the preseason and maybe upgrade the position that way. But I think kind of operating like that, it's a little on the risky side coming off an injury. But I do think that in the next couple of years they may find themselves with some future starters. Whether it's Travis and maybe the replacement for Rodgers when he does decide to retire or his play falls off. Um, I think there's some good, running back depth for, I can't imagine they wouldn't re-sign Bryce, but I mean, it's always possible. The running back sort of situation is a little odd. They've got some nice safety depth. They've got some like a potentially like maybe a sort of top 10 slot corner sort of in Corley potentially, if depending on sort of how he kind of works in the NFL. So definitely some good stuff, but neat. It'll definitely be a draft where you may not see those returns for a couple of years. So good overall, but maybe not the approach that maybe they need in terms of lining up trying to win a Super Bowl. But I think with the Chiefs, it's also kind of hard to like feel too confident in making let's just load up this year and kind of sacrifice future years, because it's just really hard to beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. So I kind of do see the value in maybe planning for the future a little more than you'd think when you have Aaron Rodgers. So next, okay, so let's go ahead and transition to the Dolphins. So for the needs for the Dolphins, I saw right guard, a tight end, defensive tackle, middle linebacker, then nickel corner. So not a ton of needs. They definitely have some older players, some players where they want to maybe get the sort of next in line, sort of in the building and start to work and play a role for now, and then maybe take into a full-time starter later on. So they drafted Chop Robinson, edge out of Penn State, with their first pick, and it was number 21 overall. Then their second round, they got Patrick Paul, who's an offensive tackle. In the fourth, they got Jalen Wright, who's a running back. In the fifth, they got Kamara, who's an edge. On the sixth, they have two of them. The first one is Malik Washington, another wide receiver. And then they got Patrick McMorris as a safety out of Cal. And then Washington, again, another wide receiver out of USC in the seventh. So they drafted sort of two edge players that are going to sort of need some development. I really see them being sort of future starters, and I think Chop Robinson has the potential to, I don't know if being a top 5 pass rusher, I don't know if I necessarily see that, but I definitely see sort of a higher end, a more interesting sort of player, kind of move around, do a bunch of different stuff. A very intriguing prospect for sure. They got some offensive tackle injury assurance and backup. A little high, I think, in the second round, but obviously probably future starter there. And with the injuries that they had last year on the line, I think obviously having someone who can really step in and play, not someone who can step in and hopefully doesn't sort of screw up your offense, but someone who can really play, I think is definitely a good thing. They drafted sort of two wide receivers. And I think Washington could be a good slot. it's definitely insurance if OBJ doesn't really play well in the slot. I know he did a little bit of that. I think in with the Rams. I believe he was more of an outside wide receiver at the Baltimore last year. I could be wrong with that, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Um, but I think Washington's best asset is going to be able to do sort of off script plays, which isn't necessarily something that Tua does the best at. So he could more function in the slot, but I think he's going to be buried in the depth chart. Could be a punt, kick returner, develop into more of a more consistent option as like a fourth, fifth wide receiver. Could be more something where maybe you see OBJ beginning of the year, and if Washington really shows out, then maybe sort of down in the future, he could um, he could potentially be more of a like a more of a consistent role player later in the year, especially as they're making that playoff push. I could see McMorris, the safety, being competitor with Poyer. Maybe start over him later in the year, or if there's injuries. He's sort of depth and special teams as a rookie. I don't really see a ton of like upside necessarily with him, but I think he could be a consistent like starter, like definitely like a good player, like maybe not Pro Bowler necessarily, but like a good starting safety, which is what most people need. They just need someone who's back there who can make sure to sort of run sort of the back end of the defense, make sure that things don't get behind them. One good thing about working or playing on the Dolphins is you don't have to worry about Tyreek Hill because he's on your team, so that always helps with the safety position. You don't have to worry about getting burned deep. Obviously, there's Xavier Worthy and some other really fast receivers in the league now, but no one's Tyreek Hill. So they drafted some interesting players. They didn't really fit any of the needs. I kind of also see this as a like draft for the future type. A little strange. I mean, I don't really want to get into the whole Tua contract stuff, but it does make me wonder if they may not end up signing him. They may kind of do a couple franchise tags and then maybe try to get like a first round like compensation, like I forget the names of the different franchise tags, but maybe hope that someone else will sign him away and they'll get some sort of compensation for it with some of these picks. And I could be totally wrong. Maybe they do sign him. They kind of, but you got Tua who needs to be signed. Tyreek Hill at one point said he was going to retire at 30, but it doesn't sound like he's going to be doing that anymore. Once he starts slowing down, it's going to be really hard for him to sort of keep up. That speed that's just like sort of what he really excels at is just being really really quick. So some of this sort of future, so it kind of doesn't necessarily like make a ton of sense like from a like strategic perspective, but yeah, I can definitely see some of these players being future starters, and maybe sooner rather than later. You got their I'm trying to remember their defensive end coming off the injury, spacing on his name right now, but you got him coming out of injury, so maybe Robinson at least starts the year while he's coming back. He may when he comes back might not be the same player, so I can definitely. I could definitely see like a role, and even if they don't start the whole year, maybe starting at the beginning with some people are coming back from injury. So this is another B for me. I think there's like a good mix. I think there's some good players in here. I'm a little more high on the Dolphins draft picks than the Jets. I think the players that they picked who might have future sort of starting potential a little stronger. It's always a little easier when you have a second round pick. That obviously doesn't help the Jets in terms of having a good draft, missing their second round pick. But I'm a little higher on the future potentials of the Dolphins here than the Jets, and even maybe more than the Patriots. I think it's sort of right in line. So definitely both of them. So yeah, so I would say sort of a B also, kind of around in the middle there. So moving on to the Bills, obviously they kind of swooped in at the last minute. Were kind of like went on this crazy run. I really thought that they were going to miss the playoffs. and not only getting into the playoffs but getting the second seed. Obviously, we know what happened with Kansas City, but again, if the worst thing that happens to your team is that you lose to Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, you're maybe you're not doing great, but it's okay. A lot of teams are losing to the Chiefs. So, all right. So for the Bills, we've got some of the needs. We got wide receiver. We got a guard and center. I see like running back, defensive end, and then defensive tackle depth and safety and a punter. So a lot of needs actually for. I mean, obviously we saw in the offseason a lot of names got released. I'm not 100% sure of how much drop off where like who they replaced them with compared to who they were. A lot of players, Poyer, Hyde, um, Mitch Morris, Trey White, a lot of these players, from some of I did a couple of film breakdowns on my channel. Feel free to check them out. If you're interested in that sort of stuff. A little more sort of film analysis on some of the Bills, like Josh Allen. I did one on Josh Allen, did one on the offensive line. Um, some of those players, they're not falling off by any means. And I honestly, if I was the Bills, I might have tried to keep them if it would work financially. I'm sure a lot of that was financial, especially with the Diggs. Getting rid of Diggs, I think that's the sort of like future financial, not necessarily this upcoming year, because obviously they're eating the money, but I think they're getting out of a deal that was. I don't know if Josh Allen advocated for it on his behalf, or if it was like, if you don't give me this extension, I'm gonna sit out. Yeah, I don't know behind the scenes stuff, obviously, um, but I think they're sort of setting themselves up to really not necessarily maybe make a run this year, although I think they will be competitive and they might win the division again and maybe lose to the Chiefs again or lose to the Bengals or a lot of the other good AFC teams. Obviously, the Ravens are in there too. I think all three of those are just like neck and neck with each other. And so um, there's I think they've poised themselves to maybe make another splash move next year. Maybe Von Miller gets off the books. Obviously, the Dig stuff gets off the books. They may have. I think a lot of it will depend on who they're up to resigning. I think Rousseau needs to be resigned. So there's some interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff with the Bills, but some of these needs are sort of like name recognition. So I'm not exactly sure how much drop off we're going to have. I also saw some, obviously Gabe Davis and Diggs. I do feel like they're both good players still, but maybe not quite what, Diggs maybe not quite what he once was, obviously, as he's getting older. And then Davis, I think he really needs to be used in a very specific way. More of if he's put into a certain role, he can be amazing at that role, but I'm not sure if he's as versatile as what the Bills needed for the offense they were running. So a little bit of a tangent there. But going into the draft, obviously they traded back a few times. They got their first pick in the second round. They took Keon Coleman, very sort of polarizing type pick, but I guess again with kind of like the same thing with Drake Maye with the Patriots. A lot of it depends if he turns into a maybe not a top 5 receiver, but if he turns into a top 10, top 15 receiver, they loaded up on capital. He's very good at what he does. He could be an amazing pick with considering the other sort of ammunition they were able to pick up from doing that. In another second round pick, they got Cole Bishop, safety out of Utah. In the third, they took Dwayne Carter, who's a defensive tackle out of Duke. In the fourth round, they got Ray Davis, sort of a bruising type back out of Kentucky. They had 3 fifth-round picks, so they got Cedric Van Pran Granger, who's a center from Georgia. Then they got Olufushio, is a linebacker out of Washington, also in the fifth. And then they got Javon Solomon, a very sort of traitsy, but obviously questions about where he played, and then kind of more of a raw talent. They got Grable as an offensive tackle out of UCF in the sixth, and then their sixth one, they got a Daquan Hardy, who's an interesting sort of cornerback that they drafted, and then the Travis Clayton, he's the player out of England. Right now, they're looking at him to be an offensive guard. So he's interesting players all around. Again, a lot of, and we've seen this from the Bills. It's a lot of traitsy players that have like a lot of sort of potential. But I think they also drafted some maybe not day one starters, but day one contributors. So obviously Keon Coleman, with all of the turnover at the wide receiver position, I can't imagine he won't start, especially on the outside. The Bills have never really had a ton of like really great outside receivers. I think Cole Bishop. I actually want to do a video on this maybe sometime during the summer, but I'm really interested to see Cole Bishop. I think what we saw in the um, in the game in the playoff game against the Chiefs, I think I see some Cole Bishop, Jordan Poyer sort of versatility there. Obviously, maybe not quite as good as Poyer was sort of in his prime right away, but I can definitely see developing into that. So I do see him sort of starting. Dwayne Carter is a really interesting player. He's like it's I think he was like a 3-year team captain if I remember right. Really sort of solid. Kind of like a good like technical player at the tackle position. Ray Davis, running back, was an interesting, I think, like an RB2, a nice like change of pace back. I think what they were hoping to get out of, I'm also forgetting his name, but Bills fans can you go ahead and correct me. But their backup running back last year, Latavius Murray. I think Ray Davis is sort of what like a young version of that. Maybe not quite as powerful. Obviously, not going to know the game as well as Murray being such a vet, but interesting pick and definitely high value there. With Van Prant Granger, I'm a little torn. I actually think there's a chance that he's just going to start. I know they've been talking about a lot of different stuff, maybe moving him around. I think that it's really a question of Granger is is Granger going in center and keeping the rest of the offensive linemen the same? Is that a better combo than moving McGovern to center? And I think David Edwards then would slot in the left guard and then keeping everyone else the same. I think I think there's going to be a lot of value in just sliding in that one position, calling it a day. But if he's not ready, if he needs development, I think he was rated like top 4 best center, something like 4th best center in the draft. So obviously not like the best center in the 5th round. You're almost never going to get that. But I definitely see some interesting there. With Olafuscio, I think that's definitely just like a sort of special teamer. Um, wouldn't be hugely surprised if he didn't make the team, so I think it's a little bit of a reach. I don't see a ton of upside with athleticism, so it's a little interesting. Usually with the Bills, we kind of see these like really traitsy athletic players, and I don't really see that kind of upside with Olafuscio. But it does make me a little concerned with some of their linebacker depth from last year. The 3rd round pick that they grabbed does make me a little nervous that maybe they don't necessarily like they just haven't seen what they saw out of Bernard from him. So it does make me a little nervous that Olafuscio might be kind of going into that rotation and sort of overcutting. Solomon, I honestly don't know. I think that is a classic Bills Brandon Beane sort of draft pick of just grab a guy who, if he hits, could be like he could be an amazing pass rusher. He could also never play, so it's very difficult. It's very same thing with Grable. He's also like offensive tackle. I think they've done this a couple years in a row where they've grabbed people. They are not really like rosterable. They put them on the practice squad. They go onto a team that has the space on the roster to fit them, and then they some of them start, and are like sort of medium sort of level players. Some of them never start, but they didn't spend a draft pick on them, so it's not a big deal. Daquan Hardy, I'm really interested to see because I think that he could be sort of an heir apparent to Teron Johnson. He's a very sort of quick corner. He's a little bit on the shorter side, if I remember right, but I do see some sort of interesting thing from there. And then Travis Clayton, basically, it's basically they used the 7th round pick for an extra practice squad. He's obviously not going to play. Guard's not really a need. I guess the only way that maybe he could like potentially play, maybe not day one, but throughout the year would be um, if they do move McGovern to center and then David Edwards sort of plays maybe through the bye week and then maybe Clayton is really showing that like learning the technique and learning the game and learning all the calls and all that sort of stuff, or at least having to how to communicate on the offensive line. I think that's like a big part that a lot of people miss with some of these international players is like it's the communication. A lot of stuff that just doesn't, it's a different way of talking. And they need to understand what you're saying. You need to say stuff back. It's a lot of code words and just a lot of things that um, that needs to happen. So I mean, I definitely think I would be shocked if it's more than just a free practice squad spot for a seventh round pick. But I think it's a smart move. I think it's grab a guy. In the seventh round, you're kind of like it's kind of a shot in the dark, anyways. They're probably not going to always make the roster, depending on sort of how strong your roster is. So if you don't think they're a rosterable player necessarily, sort of shot in the dark, grab someone who you can just throw on the practice squad. Now maybe someone else picks them up, but I can't imagine someone else will roster someone week one like that. It's always the potential. I mean, maybe a team thinks they're going to be garbage. I don't. So I want to give the Bills an A. I do, but I don't see. And of course, they've been in the playoffs. They're picking in the later parts of the rounds. So I think in terms of fitting needs, A all the way, right? But in terms of getting like difference makers, I think they're going to get a bunch of solid contributors. I think Keon Coleman is going to be a good receiver. I think Cole Bishop is eventually going to become a very good safety. Maybe not Pro Bowl, but a very good quality starter. Same thing with Dwayne Carter. Ray Davis. Van Pran Granger. All these players. But aside from Solomon, I don't really see like this person could be like a top 10 player at their position. I don't really see a lot of that. I think Hardy's interesting because of the fact that I think he does have sort of some like athleticism with him, and at least can be like maybe a really like dynamic punt kick returner and stuff like that. And then obviously cornerback depth is always good. But I think I'm probably going to give a B all around because I just don't see the upside. I think that the Bills in the past have gone a little too much on the upside, and I think now they're kind of like shying away from that maybe too much, and maybe not valuing some traitsy players. To me, if I was the Bills, I probably would have stayed at, I think it was 27 if I remember right, either picked Worthy or Mitchell, personally, because I liked a lot from those two players. Personally, I don't know if maybe Worthy, maybe not as much there, but I definitely think the Bills could have maybe even traded back again from 33, maybe a few spots, and there was probably I would say 3 or 4 receivers that are probably very comparable, different players, but comparable in terms of outlook. So. Be interested. I mean, maybe one of these players pops off, and I'm totally wrong, and it'll be exciting to see. But I just don't see a ton of players with upside. I think we're going to have in this draft, it's going to be a lot of quality starters. So I'd be interested to hear what Bills fans say. Obviously, anyone fan of the AFC East, pop in, let me know what you think. Maybe there's some, obviously some free agents that maybe got picked up sort of later and like after the draft that you're excited about. Put in some comments. Feel free to like and subscribe if you like this kind of thing. I'm gonna continue kind of going around the NFL. I'm trying to get that done sort of before training camp starts. So yeah, let me know what you guys think, and we'll see you next time.